Good day, everybody. Randy Franklin Smith here, and today we're talking about moving up the maturity model with regard to privileged account management. So today's webinar is brought to you by Beyond Trust. They are a very loyal sponsor of our real training for free. And I've got just a quick question for you. By the way, I've got Martin Kennard with me here from Beyond Trust. And Martin is an expert in privileged account management. And Martin, please jump in and provide color commentary where it fits. And I mean, you helped me put this one together so you know a lot about what's going on. The other thing is I want to extend that same invitation to everybody else out there. Please share any and all comments, thoughts, questions, observations, tips, or whatever through the question window, and I'll work as much of that in as I can, all right? So let's see, I'll just give you a couple more minutes here. We usually get up to about at least 50% here on this first question, and then we won't take more time with it, and we'll jump into the real stuff, the good stuff here. All right, thanks, everybody. And here we go. So we're going to take this all the way from back basically in what I would say, Martin, the early 90s to today, and what you can do right now and what we need to be doing right now in terms of managing privileged accounts. Now, the mature privileged account management, that the bar for mature privileged account management has kind of been a moving target, because as risks increase and the risk posture changes, then likewise our requirements and where we set the bar for admin management, that changes as well. So I think that should be acknowledged, because at one time it was okay to do things a certain way, but then that changed as the bad guys developed more and better ways, and as just the sheer number of systems that we had to manage grew. So back in the day, you know, systems just had built-in privileged accounts, and that was really all you had. I mean, Martin, at the beginning of time, 3 seconds after the Big Bang, Linux systems, all they had was root. There was no su or sudo, hey?
Yeah, no, absolutely. That was actually when I was born in the Big Bang. But yeah, no, that's all you had. It was just the account, and everybody, you know, used them and logged on with very simple passwords.
Yeah, so what we're picturing here then is if we've got 3 admins and they all 3 need to manage, you know, that Windows system, that Linux system, and that router appliance or device or whatever, you know, just everybody knew the password of that built-in account on each system, and that's how it was. Of course, it created a lot of problems even back then, but then as the number of systems grew, that became even bigger. And, you know, at one time, even larger companies didn't manage, individual people did not manage that many different systems. I mean, I remember when we had file servers, but basically you had departmental file servers, Martin, and so you had a network admin, and he only had one server to manage. Maybe our ratio at the company as that was a little bit higher or lower, I should say, than others, but anyway, you know, there just wasn't that many systems at the bottom line.
Yeah, no, agreed.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, and so I mean, you're absolutely right. I mean, you know, there just wasn't the scale and the complexity today. I mean, I you know, went from the whole, you know, Novell side, you know, and you know, kind of sort of deploying NetWare through changing to NT and you know, all the sort of, you know, Windows technologies, and you know, it was very often that you know, departments you know, were run by a small number of people. There was a small number of individuals, and you know, they use the same passwords for everything. I mean, people didn't want to remember different things. Complexity wasn't always an issue. In the early days, you didn't even really have complex passwords. So not only were they, uncomplex and everybody knew the password, they weren't even rotated on a regular basis.
Yeah. But, just think of the problems that began to occur as all of this grew. Keeping passwords secret when that many people know it, handling password change and distribution, then somebody's job changes or somebody's terminated. And then when we started seeing the need to have an audit log of what admins were doing, we had no accountability between admins because everything was root or admin. And passwords are frequently duplicated between systems and so on. So obviously lots of problems. So the first thing that we saw happen, we started recommending, I remember back when I was teaching audit and security of Windows to IT auditors, was that best practices, each admin needs their own account. And as soon as we had domains, so basically at the beginning of time with Windows NT and forward, why we could do that because we had domains, and then very quickly after that we had Active Directory. And it was always built pretty well so that Alice could have her account, Bob could have his own account, and we could make them a domain admin, which then gave them admin authority to every computer within the domain, and we were good. And then, within Active Directory, we preached delegated authority instead of putting them in domain admins and so on. Now, in the Linux and Unix world, that could be a little more difficult or challenging because most of those systems were not integrated with a central directory and central sign-on. And so if we're going to do if we're going to do individual accounts, we're still at the individual account layer, then, Alice could have one Alice account for all of the Windows systems, but then would need a separate Alice account on each of these Linux or Unix systems that she was going to log on to. And so we got still a preponderance of duplicate accounts for people, multiple accounts per person. And so it was around that time that AD Bridge started to get popular and we could eliminate those individual local accounts on those systems and basically make them citizens of the Active Directory environment. And so something we'll see as we go through this is invariably to be at the forefront of a mature privileged account management practice, we need integration between AD and Linux and Unix systems. Let's see here. What else did I want to bring out? But the problem is admins were always running with privilege. And so this led to various problems or risks. One is, if I'm always running with the safety off, then I'm going to have a lot more accidental firings, right, of a rifle. And so that's how it is if you're always logged in with admin authority, even when you're doing stuff that doesn't require it. Plus, it makes it so much easier to hijack an account because your admins are always logged on with admin authority. We weren't even thinking about it at the time, really, but privileged account artifacts, privileged credential artifacts, I should say, were getting created on all these systems that admins were logging on to. Keystroke logging has always been an issue. And since an admin's logged on all the time from the very beginning of their Windows logon as an admin, then bad guys didn't even need to harvest credentials or log keystrokes necessarily. All they had to do was be able to run arbitrary code because since the person is logged on with privilege, then anything that gets run under that interactive logon session is going to be run with privilege as well. So individual admin accounts gave us accountability. And it helped us start to lock down built-in accounts like admin and root, but it didn't address all these other risks. And the bad guys correspondingly started focusing on these risks here. And so we said, well, you know what? We really need to give each admin two accounts, a regular everyday unprivileged account that we would use for everything, for everything that doesn't really require admin authority. So that would include browsing the web, reading email, opening up attachments, opening up any document from the web. All of that kind of stuff is inherently dangerous and just cannot be completely protected from the ever-evolving landscape of threats that are built around malformed content. Let's just put it that way, malformed content, maliciously formed content, whether that's content in an email or a document or a URL or a web page, JavaScript, or whatever. So we said, well, let's give each admin two accounts. And now we log on to our workstation with our non-privileged account, and everything is done under that non-privileged account until we have a specific operation needing privilege. And in the Windows world, we said, well, you either have to log out and log back in, which everybody hated that for understandable reasons, or you have to have a separate workstation, and so you swivel between the two computers. Or finally, we said, hey, what about RunAs? I run Outlook as my regular account, but then when I need to do something in AD, I shift control right click on Active Directory users and computers and start that up as my my personal admin account. And we thought, man, that's great. That was best practice for a while, if you remember that, Martin.
Yeah, well, and that's the key thing really is the fact that I mean, you get a lot of benefits with dual accounts. Like we know, I mean, we know who the user is, but invariably, human beings being what they are is when you give somebody the ability to be able to control passwords to their standard account and their admin account, invariably they're going to make them the same. They're actually going to use the same password throughout. Unfortunately, and it's still a very sort of sad fact today, people mix passwords when it comes to their personal life and their business life. So, for example, if Yahoo or any other sort of personal account that I might have becomes compromised in the personal space, then ultimately, if I'm have the same password in business, my standard account and my admin account is set to the same, I'm really unwittingly exposing myself to or exposing my accounts to a lot of misuse. And and really dual accounts in this scenario is really more around convenience rather than security at this point, I think.
And so just to amplify something you said, Martin, then we had no idea if Alice used the same password for both her non-privileged and privileged account, or even used that same password for stuff out on Amazon or Google. So that's a real problem in itself. But there's also the problem that we were logging on the same computer usually. We thought, hey, it's secure if everything we do that's dangerous is with our non-admin account, but then we use RunAs or something like that when we need to run something that's privileged. But the problem is that this created credential artifacts, and by that I'm talking about pass the hash attacks, but all the other attacks that are associated or related to that. And so I just collectively call those credential artifacts. But you think Mimikatz when I say that, or keystroke logging, because if I'm logged in with my non-admin account and I do something that results in bad guy code running on my PC and it starts logging keystrokes, then all it has to do is wait for me to open up RunAs or a telnet client like PuTTY, right? And now, bam, we've got the admin credentials. So having dual accounts helped with accountability, but did not really get us further than that. So then what really happened next is PAM and PSM really got going. So PAM, I want to see these two together. I myself, and so I always draw diagrams as though we're using both. Not there is a variation of using just PAM, but let's assume we're using PAM and PSM. So privileged account management is the technology that knows all your privileged accounts and securely vaults those passwords and choreographs the checkout of those accounts according to entitlements that you set ahead of time and even live approvals. So Alice can request a privileged account like the root account for system A or system B, and then the PAM system will see, well, is she entitled to that account? Yeah, she can. She is. She can just get it immediately, or she can request it, but it has to be live approved by somebody of this group. So that's what PAM does. But it still typically results in her knowing the password only temporarily, but still she finds out the password of that account, and likely that password travels through her workstation, where we've already said we need to assume that workstation, since it touches the internet, since it does things like web browsing, is compromised. And so if we bring privileged session management into this as well, now PAM does not even find out what the password of the administrator account is. Instead, after checking the entitlements and possibly getting any necessary approvals, what PAM gets, what Alice gets instead of the password to root is she gets a root session on the requested system or an admin session on the requested system, and can now do her work. Now, if we don't require the right kind, if we don't require the right kind of two-factor authentication, then Martin, even in this situation, if Alice's laptop is compromised, then the bad guy could still succeed in initiating a privileged session just by taking control of the laptop where the only account she's ever logged in as is her non-privileged account. And that could be done a number of ways, but the simplest one to describe is with keystroke logging. So she authenticates to the PAM PSM system using her AD account, and now the bad guy could do that as well, because that's just a matter of running a program on her system and knowing her credentials or succeeding in authenticating as her. But if we take and add two-factor authentication that requires a separate device, and by separate device, that could be your traditional one-time password token like an RSA Secure ID, or it can be a separate, her phone, her smartphone. And I tell you, with a smartphone, not only are we verifying that Pam is really her AD unprivileged account on her laptop, but we're also verifying that she has her phone, physical possession of her phone at that moment in time, but that it's she that has the phone too, because she can't approve that pushed authentication request unless she authenticates to her phone. And so at that point, even if her workstation is totally owned, we have removed the ability for a bad guy to take advantage of that to initiate a privileged connection. And so now the type of opportunity for the bad guy, even with full control of her workstation, is greatly limited. They would have to get in there during the same session as her and mess around without her noticing it, and that's like, at this point in time, that is that's really out there. So let's see here. That was a long dissertation, but the thing that we saw that kind of backslid here was that we kind of stepped away or backed off from using dual accounts. And so what happens then is once you actually make it to the system being administered, we're back to being administrator or root. And that means that even though it's very secure, we made sure that it really, really, truly is Alice. The audit logs generated on the target system, whether it's the operating system or the applications and databases on it, of the privileged stuff that Alice is doing, that falls back to being opaque and just being admin or root or administrator or whatever. Let me give you a chance to get in here, Martin, because I know you had some comments here too.
Yeah, I mean, and actually that's a real problem that you're just mentioning. It's the correlation, because just imagine a scenario where you're sending all your syslog events up to a SIM, you've identified an anomaly, and you can see that somebody accessed the root account at 11:05 a.m. on Tuesday. Now, what you then got to do is you then have to log on to your PAM system. You then got to look at the logs, and you've got to find who was using the account at that time. Now, that's assuming that all of your logging and your time login is in sync. Easy for me to say. Now, in today's world of more authentication and Kubernetes and that sort of thing, then really directory sync and time sync is almost a given. But it's definitely something where it's a whole step you have to go through. In terms of looking up everything, you can't just look at a set of logs and say, okay, I know exactly who was using it at that time. So it's just very complex. It's not impossible, but it can be very complex.
Yeah, and I don't think we've talked about UEBA or SIM really, but if we are trying to apply user entity behavior analysis principles to privileged account activity, that means that UEBA is where we develop a profile of what is normal for an individual user as well as their peer group. So that means that the actions occurring on a system need to be tied to the actual identity performing those actions. And we lose that if we step back from using dual accounts. So it's kind of interesting. Going back to using built-in accounts isn't insecure in terms of the preventive controls, but it's insecure in terms of the additional detective controls that we put in place and that are really gaining momentum. In fact, I've done a webinar recently on applying UEBA to privileged accounts. And so I would argue that we should call that PUBA, or Privileged User Behavior Analysis, as if we didn't already have enough acronyms. But at any rate, it's not just that. Compliance says that every admin should have their own separate individual account, and that audit logs should show the specific identity that performed actions. You can find stuff like that directly called out in PCI, for example. So that we're far advanced here using PAM and PSM, but that's kind of the final challenge. So that brings us then to phase 5. And this is where we have everything. We have PAM and PSM. So that means that we have, thanks to PAM and PSM, we have total isolation of privileged accounts. But instead of having PAM and PSM choreograph access to root and administrator, we have dual accounts still. So Alice has her regular everyday unprivileged Alice account. That's what she logs onto her workstation as. That's what she reads her email, browses the web, and uses Office as, and so on. But when she needs a privileged session to administer some server or workstation or device out there, She goes through PAM-PSM. She authenticates as her everyday unprivileged account. The PAM-PSM system does the extra authentication. And then what it does is it choreographs building a privileged session to the system being administered, to the target system. But instead of using root or admin, it uses her second admin account. So, Alice and Alice admin. And so now, in addition to getting that isolation of privileged accounts that PAM-PSM gives you, we also have end-to-end accountability of individual administrators. Starting at PAM and PSM, we know it's Alice who created the session, who got her approvals and so on. The session was created, and then where the audit logs hand off to that target system, everything that she does is still identified as her specifically, whether it's at the OS level or the database or application level. So that's all well and good, but we create a burden in terms of managing these dual accounts. There's a lot of manual work, repetitive maintenance, and re-verification that comes along, because here's just one example of what I'm getting at. How do we know that the Bob admin account is only accessible by Bob? If we have to set all these accounts up in our PAM-PSM system, then that all has to be done manually, and it has to be done right every time for each admin account. And that's because the PAM-PSM system is not really aware semantically of these dual accounts. And that's the kind of the final challenge then. Would you agree with me, Martin? Any mature PAM-PSM system would allow you to do dual accounts, but you've got to manage it yourself, and you've got to re-verify it all the time to make sure that it hasn't slipped. Agreed?
Absolutely. And actually, let me sort of add a bit more of a complex scenario to that. If you think of a lot of large organizations, they have multiple domains. It's not just, one domain with a standard account and, the same domain with their admin account. They might have 5 domains, 10 domains. Each one has an admin account. So now you also have to map every unprivileged user account, of which there is one, to many administrative accounts across different domains, and that may vary according to role. A person's role changes. Now all of a sudden you have to adjust your policy for that person. You have to add this account. You have to take it away. It's, it can become repetitive to the point where very often people use shared accounts purely because this is so burdensome. Now obviously there's a lot of benefits, but that's the balance that the people are trying to make right at the moment.
That is very true. That is very true. So this is where Power Broker comes in, which I'll talk about in a second. But what we're getting down to is today, mature privileged account management requires that privileged accounts be secure in terms of being isolated and protected in 3 ways. With PAM-PSM done right, we have isolated and protected the admin password from even the admin. So the admin, it's isolated from the admin doing mistakes when they're not even in a privileged session. It's also helps to protect from rogue admins to a degree, and if we add privileged user behavior analysis on top of that, that helps more. But the password is also protected from the knowledge and bad habits. It's isolated from the knowledge of the admins, and then that means it's protected from the bad habits of humans and what we do with passwords if we know the password. Plus, with PAM-PSM, our admin passwords are isolated and protected from the workstations that admins use, and that unless we constantly and faithfully use two different workstations with different dedicated purposes, then we have to assume those workstations are compromised. So that's the secure aspect of privileged account management, but that we also have accountability throughout the entire stack. So every audit log, whether it's from PAM-PSM, whether it's from the workstation, whether it's from the target system being administered and whatever layer on that system, everything that Alice does is identified as Alice. But it also needs to be efficient, and it needs to work the same way in Unix and Linux, which means that we need AD integration, and we probably need delegation, whether we do it ourselves with sudo or use something more sophisticated like your sudo and steroids technology is what I like to call it. Now, here's the thing. The latest level of functionality enhancement from PowerBroker not only does traditional PAM-PSM isolation of privileged accounts, but it also is dual account aware. And it is just amazing the amount of work this eliminates. So Martin, show us this, and I think folks will be pleasantly surprised. I'm making you the presenter.
All right, perfect. So the and actually just one of the key things there. So I'm just going to launch this presentation. You know, one of the really key things is the fact that companies are very torn. They want all the benefits of dual accounts. They want the accountability. They want to be able to look in all of their logs and see exactly what Alice and Bob did. But it's just the overhead of administering it sometimes is a little bit too much. And so what we did, and this is actually many years ago, actually I'm going back to when I was working for competitive companies in the space. We would go out to organizations and try to implement security that is based upon multiple policies. And you get to situations where people try to do it in a bad way. They end up using APIs. They're trying to set up 10,000 policies. So we've developed a solution built into Password Safe. When you see it, it allows you to be able to do it. So in a way, it's almost like privilege without the pain. So let me just give you a refresher about what Password Safe is. So as you'd imagine, as the title suggests, it's all around managing passwords. There's carbon-based life forms that need to be able to go in. They need to be able to access credentials, whether it's passwords that need to be typed for whatever reason. There's services that need to be able to have passwords, and have those regularly recycled, but still be able to restart, be restarted and function normally. Same with things like scheduled tasks. And then there's, the plethora of, A2A that's out there. I mean, whether it's, anything that's working in a DevOps space, like a CI/CD pipeline, with hard-coded passwords, set between different orchestration tools, or whether they're, homegrown applications that happens to be, and you've got some sort of hard-coded database connection string in there. These are all things, that can be rotated, and these are all things that can be supplied. Now, as we mentioned, the key thing is, or what I always say, like the best password management solution is one where you never give the password out. And the way that you never give a password out is you log the user in automatically. So what that does is that removes a lot of the issues. If you think of, Randy's slide earlier when we're talking about, people logging into insecure systems, even if you think of PAM without PSM, you might say, okay, I need the password to root. And so what it does, or, you check it out, it gives you the password. If you haven't got PSM to type it in automatically, now all of a sudden you're at the mercy of a keylogger or anything else, because you're still, you're still essentially pasting that buffer or potentially typing that password in somewhere. So it doesn't really help you too much, in terms of protection against that. So session management, is great for auditing, but the really key thing is you never reveal the credential. Now, when we start looking at the way a proxy works in conjunction with, for example, dedicated accounts, let's use the example that we've been looking at today. So as a user, I've got an mCanard account in Active Directory. That's, gives me the ability to be able to log on to password safe using that credential. Now that's then going to give me an ACL-driven list of systems that I have access to. If I need access to, let's say we got a PCI system or something that's squirreled away in an enclave somewhere, I can select that, and then what happens is the proxy will then generate a unique one-time key. Now this is where we do things like protection against things like mimikatz and people sort of finding artifacts to be able to log on to systems. So this one-time key that's sent down to the desktop, it is just a random GUID. It's used as a username to log on to the proxy. It uses a standard client, so it can be anything you like, MSTSC, MOBA Xterm, mRemote, NG, devolutions, for SSH, Teraterm, PuTTY, Reflection. I mean, it really doesn't matter what tool you use. It's just protocol dependent. Now, what that does is that will then connect through to the proxy, but in this case, it's going to log me on to those systems using my admin credentials. So on the one side, it means that as a user, I never know what my admin credential is. That means that even if somebody ties me up with rope and tortures me with, red hot pokers or whatever, I've got nothing I can give. I don't know what that password is at all. All I know is the password that can get me onto the system. Now, even if that becomes compromised, as Randy said, when you add two-factor, and especially things like, as I say, smartphones with biometrics, that is something that, really allows you to be able to identify who the user is. So only I can actually log on to this system and have access to this account. So you've got complete separation. So in the memory space, of this system, there's no host name, there's no username, there's no password of the managed system I'm trying to connect to. All there is just this one-time GUID, this key that's used to log me onto the proxy. As soon as I've used it, it's expired. It's no good. It's even time limited as well. So if it's not used in a certain time, again, it's completely expired. So this is really the key thing about it. Now, what I'm describing here, again, isn't rocket science. A lot of systems can do this. They have the ability to be able to do it. So what I'm going to show you in a minute is some ways in which we can make it easier to implement this type of solution. But before we do so, I just want to describe some of the benefits that you're going to get with session management over and above that. On the one hand, it allows you to be able to have a recording, a video recording of everything that happens. You can record every single keystroke that's typed. We even actually record everything that gets put into the paste buffer as well. So, some admins might think, oh, you know what, I'll get around the system. I'm in an RDP session. I'll type out all the stuff that I need and I'll put it in Notepad and then I'll paste it in. So I haven't typed it. Well, sorry, kids. It gets, indexed and it gets added in. So, just as any other keystroke, you can search on it and it can be flagged for anomalies. So, you get a lot of benefits. Now, I'm showing you an RDP session here. This could actually be exactly the same with SSH. All standard in, standard out is recordable. We even record, when it comes to clicking on pictures, every single click. So if you right-click on something, you left-click on something, you select this option, all of these actions get audited, and it also, importantly, allows you to be able to search. Now, the other nice thing about this, it's not just recordings, because you might think, okay, well, a person's in a session there for an hour and they did something in the first 5 minutes. Well, you don't have to wait for that session to finish to be able to search for what that user did. You can actually search for live sessions. So as I've done something, let's say, for example, I've done something malicious, I've opened up an unusual application, maybe there's some sort of, the SIM has detected an anomaly, there's some unusual pattern of events. You can immediately go in, search for whoever ran that application, pull that session directly up as a user is busy typing away and doing stuff, and then immediately lock that session or terminate that session. So you don't have to even wait about, and find about things after the fact. You can do things real time. Now, when it comes to, to say implementing, the whole process of dual accounts, like Randy said, the big issue is the fact that you have to create an access policy for every user. Years ago, I was working with a company, again, different product, and they had, I think it was about 9,000 administrators. It was a lot of admins. Like I mentioned before, they had, some had different access to different domains, and we were just struck with the sheer complexity. I mean, how do we start? Do we actually have to sit down and create 8,000 access policies manually? And in the end, I mean, we were using a whole combination of APIs, imports. I think they had temporary staff in trying to create it, but it was just a whole mess. But then once you've got all these policies created, now you've got to keep them maintained. So you've got to create a new policy for each new hire. Every person that has access taken away, you have to adjust a policy. Every time you actually have to be, if a person leaves the company, you've got to remove a policy. So again, there's a lot of stuff. And then the key thing is at the bottom, there's no accountability. You might say, well, great. Okay, well, Bob is mapped to Bob admin. But who's to say that Martin Cannard as an administrator hasn't gone in and given Alice access to the Bob admin account, even maliciously or accidentally? Because as far as we're concerned, we look at that, that managed system log, and we see, that it actually says Bob admin. We don't know, I mean, obviously we can go back and, we got the whole, the same issues before where we have to try to correlate who was using it at a time. So the key thing is when you try to create policies is you don't always get that 100% accountability. You're pretty close, but it's not always there. So what we have is something called dedicated accounts. What it does is it maps a user to one or more of their namesake accounts. Now, the way that it works and the way that most of these things are set up is that you have a core username. Now, that could be a UPN, it could be a SAM account name. In my case, my Active Directory SAM account name is mcannard. So, I might have an account on directory XYZ called, in this case, it could be _admin2. So mcannard _admin2. Bob is Bob _admin2. But generally, when people implement dual accounts, there is a mask, to how these things are normally set up. Could be a prefix, could be a suffix. People do things in different ways. Now, what this means, though, is when we set it up within password safe, what you can see on the screen in terms of that 3-line policy, that's all you do. That will work for every single one of the administrators that need to be able to access their admin account. All that happens is, as you say at the bottom, you can actually see in the screenshot there, it's mapped to a PBPS requested group. So what it's saying is that anybody in that group that logs in, so if it's Alice logs in and maybe a SAM account name's Alice, it will look to say, is there an Alice _admin2 in the system? If there is, bang, okay, you're mapped, you've got access to it. Now, once that user is mapped to their account, after login, it cannot be added to any other access policy. So I can't go in and then add Alice _admin2 to another access policy to give it to someone else. The only person that can get it is Alice. So this is where you get the 100% accountability. So the nice thing about this solution is, as I say, it's just very simple. This is all you need for the entire thing. No policies to maintain. You can even map to multiple namesake accounts. So for example, like in the example I gave earlier, I might have 5 different domains. You can structure this query. So you could say, I mean, again, you would actually do it in this kind of a match all criteria. You can actually nest these particular criteria. So I might have a nested criteria set that says domain equals ABC, and the account dedicated account suffix is _admin. I might then have another nested set of criteria that says domain XYZ1. And that one again, it could have the same sort of matching convention, or maybe there's a different one. Maybe it's -ADM. So the bottom line is it allows you to be able to do that, and as long as there's an existing managed account for that user, a managed admin account, the system will map it to them automatically. So this is really the clear advantage, because it allows you to get all the benefits of using dedicated accounts without all of that pain. Now, some of the other things that we do that, I just want to call out as differentiators is, first of all, we've got something called adaptive workflow control. And what that really is, what it boils down to, is context. So, a lot of systems say, okay, right, well, Bob can log in from 9 to 5, and he can log in from this group of, systems, and, maybe on these days of the weeks. But then what happens then is, where's the context? So, there's the who, what, where, and when, but very often what you need is actually the ability to be able to say, I want to create a policy that's based upon a calendar entry. So, for example, I've got a group of contractors that are starting, next month. So I actually want to have something that's running from the 1st of August, maybe to the 20th of August, for this group of people to access this group of accounts between these hours of the day from this particular IP address location. So again, it's all about that granularity. Now, it could be that maybe one of those contractors also covers Firecall. So I'm actually going to create a separate policy that they can invoke that will give them access to specific Firecall accounts out of hours. So if they're working 9 o'clock at night to 5 in the morning, then here's, the policy they got to use. That's only access at that time, and you can only access certain resources. So it's all about drilling down based upon the context, giving you access to specific things. Now, the other thing that we can do, as well as logging you onto operating systems, is we can also launch applications and log you onto applications. So, for example, here, just an example of ESX, we could be managing the vSphere accounts, and again, that's, this could just as easily be your dedicated account. And so when the user needs to, access ESX, it will open up vSphere, and it will then log you on, either using a sort of fixed account, or, this under management, or it can log you on using your dedicated account. Exactly the same thing with Unix and Linux. So we can launch applications, we exec them. So, if you think of some simple use cases, you might have like a backup script. Maybe, in a non-dedicated account scenario where, you maybe, a backup script needs to run as root for whatever reason. Maybe you can't use any delegation there. You don't want to give that backup operator access to root, because they could accidentally do something or maliciously do something as well as run their script. So being able to run that specific backup script without giving them access to the shell as root, again, is another critical aspect. So it's all around, limiting that attack surface. So when we look at what makes the product different overall, I mean, the biggest thing is to say are these mapping rules, because it allows you to be able to implement best practice without the pain. There's really no excuse not to do dedicated accounts. The other thing is that the adaptive workflow control is being able to intelligently give you access to resources based upon real-time context of who you are and where you are. We have, a full scanner, and it's not just a scanner that's been built for a password management system. This is a world-class scanner that's being built for, vulnerability management, that has incredible capabilities to be able to enumerate multiple assets of all sorts. It doesn't matter whether it's network devices, databases, operating systems. I mean, all of those things can be scanned and they can be pulled in. But it also allows you to be able to automatically onboard. So you can create rules, similar to the smart rule you saw just now. The smart rule can say, you know what, if you find an account called XYZ, or maybe here's a system, that's got SQL Server installed, I want you to automatically onboard it. So again, it's that automation that's included, increases your ROI. Integrated data warehouse, all of this data gets collected. So it doesn't matter whether it's password management, session management, least privilege, vulnerability management, all of this gets collected into one system, and you have full analytics capability. The smart rules, as I mentioned, allows that dynamic permission set to be done, as well as also automated actions. One of the really cool things as well is, with a lot of solutions out there, they might say, yeah, okay, well, we can give you PAM, session management, we're going to charge you for that. SSH management, we're going to charge you for that. Threat analytics, we're going to charge you for that. With Password Safe, everything is included at the price. So you pay one price, all of the functionality is included. So it doesn't matter whether it's session management, live session monitoring, threat analytics, the dedicated accounts, API caches, all of that is built in. Lastly, it's easy to use, because ultimately, if you've got a product that's complex, people will push back against it. You don't want to be having users trying to feel as though they're trying to back the Starship Enterprise out of space dock or something. All they want to do is they want to get on with their job. They're not interested in your solution about, how good it is or whatever. They have a job to do and they want to do it as quickly as possible. So it's all around, really making it as easy to use and as friendly as used to the users. Now, I'm going to say that because I'm the product manager, so I'm going to say, yeah, it's fantastic, but don't take my word for it. Read the analyst reports. They put us consistently on top among the competition. And, it's a very nice accolade because, certainly in the case of Forrester, it's not just a question of somebody going out and actually looking at the websites and doing analysis and doing, if you like, sort of analyst queries. It was a 3-month exercise. Every vendor had to provide the same set of use cases, and they actually use the products. So this isn't just something where we're saying this is what we do. This is where Forrester actually went out and used the product. So to get that accolade to be put on top is a really great thing. So what I'm going to do now is just give you a quick demo, show you a little bit of how the system works, show you the smart rules, and then we'll open up for Q&A afterwards. So when I'm logged into an admin interface here, first of all, I'm actually just going to show you how easy the session management system is to use. And I'm actually, going to give you a couple of examples. So, one is, as an end user, I can log into a UI, and you're familiar with these types of UIs, where I can say, here's a system and account I need to be able to log on to. But as I mentioned, very often with these types of systems, even a web interface, as easy as this one is, some people push back on. They say, well, you know what, I'm used to using my own tools, and I don't want to change. I've been using my own tools, most of my career. So, you know what, if you use a MobaX term to access stuff, fine, have at it. We can actually let you do that. We've got something called Direct Connect. So that allows me as a user to be able to log on using a connection string. So I don't even have to access the web interface. So, in other words, I could do both ways. So I can, let's say, I don't know, access admin 02. I can go in, I can open up an RDP session, and then this is going to log me in. And as you can see, it's so easy to use. Now, at the moment, I'm actually using a shared account. This is called admin 02. I'm going to show you this scenario using the dedicated account. But as you can see, it's very, very easy to get in with that web interface. Now, it's even easier if I use this connection string in MobaX term. And again, this can be any tool. It doesn't matter whether it's MobaX term, Reflection, TerraTerm, MSTSC, anything you like, devolutions. I go in and it prompts you for my password. So this is my own AD credential. Again, we're talking about two-factor. If two-factor is required, I can also enter two-factor at this point. As you can see, I'm logged on in exactly the same way. It makes it very, very easy. So, it's ease of use is key as well as ease of administration. Now, the nice thing about this is, okay, I'm a happy administrator. I've gone in, I'm doing my stuff. Now, if we think about security, I want to be able to see what's going on. I can actually view all of the active sessions that are happening. So in this particular case, you see, here's the SQL 01 that was first done, and here's the one was done, which is in MobaX term. So let's say, for example, we'll take the MobaX term one, and we'll go into this. Now, within this session, as you can see, everything that I did is actually indexed. So, if I'm going into the session, let's go to that Moba index session here, and we'll create some activity. Let's open up Server Manager as well. Go to local server, maybe open up Internet Explorer. Oops, actually, I think I might have closed my session down then. Yeah, I did, right, inadvertently. But you get the drift. So everything that I do is actually recorded. Now, the nice thing is actually, this is actually quite a good segue. Because this session has ended, I got the ability to actually go back and watch that replay. Now, I still, luckily enough, got my other session open. So we got that one here. So we'll just drag this over here. And you say, want to create some activity, go in here. What I can do is, let's say, for example, something nefarious is going on. I can log the session. Now, what that means now is, as a user, I can't do anything with this system. It hasn't logged me out. I'm still logged into that session, but I can't do anything. I can't click on it. Now, this is a great way of saying, like, if you see something, do something. You don't have to worry about terminating an active session that might be legitimate. I can just lock it. I can call the user, even customize this lock screen with, some contact information to say, contact the help desk on XYZ. We figured out what's going on. It's okay. We unlock the session, and now the user can carry on and doing what they're doing. So again, it's all around that easy use and ease of security. Now, as I mentioned, when it comes to replays, when we're looking at those, everything that I'm doing, here is the admin session on Direct Connect. So I can pull this up and I can actually play the session. So everything I'm doing here, I can play back. It's a full video recording. Obviously, if I got a longer session, I can click around the bar, find out what I need to get to. If I'm searching for something, for example, I think if I open up Explorer, there we go. So I found that, and I can just click on that point, and it takes me right to that particular part of the index. I've also got the ability to be able to snapshot if I need to export something for legal reasons, and also add comments as well. Because let's say, for example, I'm an auditor, and I'm going in, and I need to be able to prove that somebody's doing something. I can say, looks okay, and I can actually mark that as reviewed. So I just lost my mouse. Come back. Oh, there we go. And now I actually have an audit trust. So this is marked as reviewed. So ultimately, if you have like SAS 70 auditors, people that are actually looking for you to do due diligence, they're saying, well, look, it's great to have something that's recording these sessions, but what are you doing with them? Prove to me that somebody is actually looking at these recordings and doing something meaningful. Now you're auditing the auditor. This is a really key thing. Now, the other thing as well, which is a really important aspect, is that people often forget about auditors, as vulnerabilities, because they think, auditors are great. They're going to go in, they're going to check everything that needs to happen. But, and they always worry about admins. So admins are going in, they're the ones that could be doing something malicious. Well, what if I was a rogue auditor and I'm watching a recording of something that had sensitive information and I steal that information? Or, I actually have information that is not appropriate for me to find. So again, having the ability to audit every person that views that session is absolutely key. So if you do find something that's been misappropriated, you're not just going back to the admin that was actually doing the session at the time. You can also go to every person that actually viewed the session. So again, really key aspect. So lastly, what I want to do is actually just show you the best way of setting up Direct Connect, because sorry, not Direct Connect, the dedicated account. So in this particular case, what I want to be able to do is I actually want to be able to map one user to their account. So in this case, you can see mcanard is mapped to the mcanard_admin2. If there were more accounts, more dedicated accounts, there'll be a one-to-one mapping. But this is basically that single smart rule. If I want to add additional domains, I can, but this is a really key thing. So all that happens then is if I do have a user, if I got a J Smith in that PBPS requester group, if there's a J Smith _admin2, it will automatically appear on the list, and J Smith will automatically get access to it. So, as mcanard that I'm logged in here, if I go to my domain linked accounts, you'll see here's my mcanard admin2, and if I need to be able to log on to it, I can log on to this server using my dedicated account, again, in exactly the same way. I don't know how many RDP sessions I've got available, but you get the drift. Oh, yeah, there we go. It's connecting me in. So, it really doesn't matter whether it's a shared account or whether it is a dedicated namesake account. It makes the process very, very easy for the user to get in there. So that's about really what I want to show you at the moment. I think at this point, what I want to do is actually turn it back, over to Randy for for Q&A. Look to see if if there's any polls or anything else to happen.
All right, great. And we do have some questions. And folks, please give us your questions for anything to do with what we're talking about today, and especially for Beyond Trust technology. So let's start with Emmett. Emmett asks, what happens if your PAM-PSM system suffers an outage? How would an admin reach a system to perform their job?
So, I mean, ultimately, I mean, with every PAM system, you have to regard it as a tier one system. It's not something that you want ever to go down. Now, obviously, you can never say never, but what you do is you add in layers of redundancy. So, the system fully supports, whether it's something as simple as active-passive, so, it's replicating in real time to a mirrored system, and then you automatically switch over to that system if you lose a primary, or even what we call multi-active, where you can have a redundant database setup and you can have multiple appliances. In some cases, we've got customers with 60, 70 appliances all talking to that, to that database cluster. It's all around trying to mitigate that. Now, the other thing that you can also do is you can leverage what we call our password cache, which again is available free of charge, and that allows you to be able to store strategic accounts. So, for example, because it is a persistent cache, as things get replicated, accounts get changed, it means that even if you lose access to any infrastructure, say your network goes down, you can't get inside even just to be able to get to it. As long as you've got access to a cache, and again, these were on Linux, they're on Windows, you've got the ability to be able to securely access those credentials. So, it's a very long answer to basically saying, it's really all around redundancy. You want to make sure that you can always recover from something like this.
And so Ziggy had asked, what high availability options does password safe include then? So you've got an active passive replication option, and what else did you say? Can we just recap those real quick?
Yeah, absolutely. So there's active. So you would have a central database cluster. So for example, you'd use like SQL Always On. You would have multiple multiple replicas, obviously one master, n number of sort of secondaries, perhaps even spread across different geographic sites, multiple appliances that users would access over a load balancer. Now, when I'm talking about an appliance, our solution is delivered as an appliance. I mean, that's again another side benefit which I haven't called out. It's not like you have to stand up lots of infrastructure. You don't have to install things on different servers. It's just, it's an appliance that's physical, that's virtual, or it's available in the clouds, on all of the different marketplaces, AWS, Azure, Google Cloud, and it allows you to be able to access, everything is included within them. So essentially, users would simply access a load balancer, that may be pam.company.com, for example, and then that would direct them to whatever appliance happens to be active at the time. Obviously, if something goes out of action, the load balancer picks that up.
Okay, now Willie asks, does privileged session recording work with Linux distributions?
Absolutely, yeah, totally. So, I mean, you saw then an example that I did for RDP. It's exactly the same for SSH. So, and it doesn't matter, really it's a protocol. So it doesn't have to be Unix, Linux. It can be a network device. It could be a firewall. Anything that you access, using the SSH protocol, is all recording in exactly the same way. You can lock the sessions as well. So, you could essentially, because that's the other thing, because very often you could terminate an RDP session, and as long as you, reconnect within your terminal services disconnection period, you reconnect to that same session. With SSH, as soon as you disconnect, you've destroyed everything that's happening. So that's another key element when it comes to SSH sessions, is because we can lock those and stop the user from interacting without disconnecting the SSH, it allows you to be able to conveniently insert a pause into that activity without any catastrophic results.
All right. Now, Jorge Junior asks, I would like to know if I can use filters to apply for a specific policy. For example, only users who belong to a security group and are in my network will be able to use the PAM solution.
100%. Yep. So filters can be based on many different things. This is where we talk about smart rules. So because what you're doing is you're essentially saying, here's a group of systems or accounts. Here is a group of individuals. Now, those groups of individuals could be local users with local groups set up in the system. They could be AD users in AD groups. They could be LDAP users in LDAP groups. We integrate, for example, with SailPoint, that they could be a group of users that belong to a SailPoint role. So essentially you're saying, here's a bucket of users, and then you're saying this bucket of users can access this bucket accounts using this particular security policy.
Okay. So John asked, so does this put people who use dual accounts with VDI, does that make them dead in the water? Does it support ICA or VMware blast protocols for proxy? Creating an application for every single admin function would be cumbersome. Do you understand what he's getting at there?
Yeah, absolutely. So, and it's a very key point, and because obviously not the entire world works on RDP, but one of the things that we do interface with are sort of remote app servers. So it allows you, let's say for example, you're using a system for administration, that allows you to be able to perform repetitive commands. So here's something where I need to run a command to be able to reset a router automatically, or I want it to, a set of commands to be able to log onto a system and to be able to, run a particular application, for example, whether it's through, Citrix or whatever it happens to be. Now, what we can do is we can give a user access to that environment as a remote app. So in other words, the user still logs onto password safe using their bog standard AD or whatever credential, their non-standard credential, and then it can then give them access to, if you like, that Citrix environment, and the Citrix environment has its permissions based upon the user's admin account. So in other words, it even makes it more secure because the user cannot directly access Citrix. All they can do is they can access password safe, and password safe then gives them access to Citrix or whatever the application could be. We can run thin apps, we can run fat apps, we can run web applications, doesn't matter what it is.
Okay, I did not know that personally. Now, so that's cool to know. Emmett asks, is the auto log off a hard limit?
No, absolutely not. It's policy based. So you could have it. So let's say, for example, I say I want to access this system for 2 hours. Now, after 2 hours, maybe nothing happens. Maybe it carries on. It lets me finish what I'm doing. Maybe I'm overrunning. Or you could set a policy up to say, at the end of this 2 hours for this systems, and again, remember our adaptive workflow control, I might have a specific policy because this user's coming over a VPN, maybe it's an unrecognized IP address range, then I want to be able to have some sort of hard limit. I don't want the user to run over. Now, what you would have seen in one of the RDP sessions there was a clock that appeared in the top left. Now, the clock appears when you're going to be automatically logged on. So it's not like the user can forget the time and then all of a sudden it's like bang, they're logged out. We do it whenever you're going to be logged off. If you're setting it by policy, it will count down, and even when it gets to the last 15 minutes, the last 10 minutes, the last 5 minutes, it will flash multiple colors in, so even depending on what your background is of your screen, there's no way that you can miss the fact that you're about to be logged out.
That's nice.
It's all policy based.
Back to Ziggy, how does password safe work with consoles like Exchange Management Console?
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, it's in exactly the same way. So what you can do, there's a couple of different ways you can do it, actually probably three, thinking about it. So, the simplest level might be that you would give a user access to be able to log on using a dedicated account or using, for example, a domain admin account onto a member server that has the Exchange Management Console installed. So that's one scenario. In which case they're logged on, they perform their work on there, and they log off. The other one is you might actually want to run the Exchange Management Console as a remote app. So in other words, what happens is, they say, okay, using this account, which could be the domain admin account, could be their dedicated account, I want to run the Exchange admin console. It will then log them in. It will launch it as a remote app, under the context of the account that they've chosen. And then once they've closed the app, they get logged out. So, that's one way of doing it. The other way of doing it is you can also use, one of our, we actually have an optional product that you can use for the client that allows you to be able to do least privilege. So effectively, you could launch, let's say, for example, on your desktop, you happen to have Exchange management console installed. You could actually run that under the context of a managed account, almost like if you think of doing a RunAs, without being exposed to the password or anything else. So again, there's 3 different mechanisms there. I mean, hopefully one of those will fit.
All right, and let's see here. Thomas asks, does Password Safe integrate with change management ticketing systems?
Absolutely, yeah. So what we have is a set of connectors. So it doesn't matter what it is, whether it's ServiceNow, Remedy, CA Help Desk, for example. I mean, what we do is, there's again, there's always a couple of ways to do everything. So, what you could do is, for example, you might go into your change management system and create a ticket. You go into Remedy and say, I need to access this. It goes through all the approvals in Remedy. When it comes time for the person to use it, they got the ticket number. They then go into Password Safe at that time. So I need to access this system account. Here's my ticket number. We go off, validate that the ticket is active, valid, et cetera, and the user gets logged in. The other way to do it is, because our API fully supports running sessions, with something like ServiceNow, for example, we have customers actually building in the whole request process into the ServiceNow interface. So for example, they go into ServiceNow, they create the ticket, and it gets approved, and then even within ServiceNow there'll be a button to say launch RDP session. So as you saw me just do just now, it would launch in exactly the same way as going through the proxy. Everything's recorded, or it might say release a password. So we can do it from a 2-stage process, work in the ticket system and then work in Password Safe. Or there are opportunities, and many companies do this, to actually work with a single consolidated system.
I'm sorry, I got an audio problem here. Can you hear me now?
Yep, yeah, I can hear you now.
Okay, sorry. We got 2 more questions. One is from Emmett. How does it work with Microsoft SQL Server integration services? I think MSSIS. Since integration services not play nice with multi-hop authentication or exporting for GUI install upgrade tools. I'm not familiar with this issue. I've heard of SQL Server integration services before, but is that something we should take up offline, or is that something you want to address now, Martin?
I'm not aware of any issues. I mean, I'll give you the 2 scenarios that we work with SQL. I mean, there's obviously SQL as a managed system, where you have other applications need to access SQL, and we're managing SQL accounts. We provide access to them. Or there's obviously SQL that's been used as a back-end component. If it's an active passive deployment, it's all built into the product. There's no databases to stand up. Basically it's just SQL using high-performance replication at the back end between an active passive pair. If you're using, the multi-active, then we'll work with a lot of different topologies. But ultimately, always on is the one that's most predominantly used, really, because of redundancy. But certainly not aware of any SSIS issues or anything specifically around that. But again, happy to take the question offline.
All right. And next, Jamie asks, can Password Safe automatically change admin passwords on all systems based on expiration policies? And that gets at the root of a couple things there. I'm interested to see what you say. I might have some extra thoughts on it. Go ahead.
Yeah. So, I mean, there's obviously multiple triggers for a password change. So one is, as you rightly mentioned, you have a policy, let's say, 30 days, 60 days, 90 days, whatever it happens to be, and you say, this applies to this group of accounts or this group of systems. So what happens then is that every time, that anniversary comes around, is, 30 days since the last change, password safe will automatically go out and rotate those credentials. Now, obviously, if there's an active session, somebody's got it checked out, it's not going to rotate it while they're actively in there. But as soon as that session gets checked in, it will change it, at the moment that session gets checked in. The other scenario, and this is actually something that the majority of our customers do, is they actually change the password after every session, because what it gives you that extra level of assurance. So, for example, as an admin, I can go in as an admin, if you like, and then change the admin password, and basically now, it's set to something different. What it means is now, if I reset the password of the account that I'm using, the moment I finish with it, now it means that when that password's at rest, nobody knows what it is. The only time that somebody knows what it is when it's actively released to a person.
Beautiful. And that's the point that I was going to make is let's eliminate the whole idea of static passwords altogether. And since humans don't know the password in the first place, we can just change it all the time, right?
Yep, absolutely.
Let's see here. And so that also, by the way, eliminates any weird credential artifact attacks that could still occur. Because at the end of the day, somebody has to log on, PAM, PSM may be doing it, but those artifacts would get left behind, but they're immediately invalidated. So it's really beautiful.
Yeah, it just reduces that attack surface. I mean, the longer something is static, the more chance there is of someone being able to do it. Because even if, for example, somebody inadvertently, maybe you've got some software and some malware on your system, that you inadvertently, you check out a password, it's been typed in or whatever, it gets it, then that person gets a password, but it's still, if you're changing the password the moment you finish with it, even though the person's got a password, it's no good to them. It's collapsing that window of time where there's an opportunity to be inappropriate with credentials.
And so that's the scenario where the admin actually gets knowledge of the temporary password. But the other thing is, you could argue that even when the admin never knows the password, like level 5 on the maturity model we were talking about, there's still a hash created when that logged on session occurs on that system, which if that system is later compromised theoretically, then that hash could be used even though a human has never known it. But again, yet another benefit of just changing the password every time it's used is as even any hashes that are left or other credential artifacts, they get invalidated as well. So let's see here. Final question that we got right now comes from Thomas. Can PSM automatically log users onto web-based management consoles like WebSphere?
Yep, totally. Yeah. So we can log users onto, as I say, normal applications. It can be onto a SSH session. It could be a web page. When we're playing in managed credentials, it handles all of those. I mean, all of those are handled and launched on the remote app server. So what it means then is that a user saying, for example, I want to use SSMS using this particular database password. So they choose that from the menu. It then launches SQL Server Management Studio, logs them straight in. Another person might want to say, I want to add the AWS console. So it will launch that web page, and then it will then actually play in the managed credentials for that user into the AWS console. But again, the nice thing is, it's not just playing the credential in, but we're also recording everything that happens. There's a full video recording, not just of the page, but of the URL bar, everything. So you can see everything that the user's doing in relation to that web session or any application.
All right, awesome. Let's see here. I think that brings us to the end of our questions and just about to the bottom of the hour, so that was perfect. You guys have done an awesome job. The whole dual account thing and basically just one rule is absolutely amazing. So thanks for showing us that and for making today's rule training for free possible.
Perfect. Thanks, Randy. Good to be here.
All right. Take care, everybody, and we'll talk to you again soon. Bye-bye.